Welcome to the Magnificast, a podcast about Christianity and leftist politics. I'm your co-host, Matt Bernico.
And I'm your co-host, Dean Detloff. Folks, it's a Pope News episode. It's the biggest Pope news that we've ever had. The bad news is that the cool Pope is gone. And we don't know if there will be another cool Pope or if there will be an uncool Pope. We're really not sure. But this is going to be a special edition of the Magnificast, a special Pope Francis appreciation post. And I think, Matt, I don't know about you, but I've discovered I'm actually very bummed to see the Pope go. To see him not be around anymore. To not see him around anymore, even. It's bumming me out.
Yeah, I feel the same way. And that's a feeling I've been kind of introspective about the last few days, which is weird. I'm not Catholic. What do I care? Is one thing that I thought to myself. But like, I do care kind of a lot, and like that's a very weird feeling. I don't know. We do this podcast. We're always talking about the Pope. We're writing about the Pope. We're always thinking about the Pope in some way. So I guess I feel very attached to this guy who I've never met and now never will. But yeah, it is a weird thing. I feel bummed too. I don't like it.
Yeah, it's strange. He's been around for over a decade now, longer than anybody expected, including he himself. And I think that it is strange to sort of discover that I've become very attached to this particular old man. And what a weird thing that I can't look up a new weird headline of him saying something bonkers, whether I like it or not. Lots of mixed things to say about Pope Francis. He was good on some stuff, not great on other things. A reformer in some ways, not a reformer in other ways. But man, I can't help but feel like when the world is just like unraveling and tearing itself apart, losing a person who did at least have a pretty strong voice for things like peace, I think is pretty rough.
Yeah, I agree. I think something that is missing deeply within Christianity is like a real moral voice that has like consistency and is not just like, I don't know, someone trying to be an influencer. So, but like Pope Francis was like a real guy who was actually just trying to teach you something about the world and about God and about Christianity, and that is not something we have a lot of, actually.
Yeah, that's right, and it really feels like he's missing right now. When we're recording this, we don't have any news about a conclave except that the date is set. It'll be on the 7th, so right around the corner, coming up pretty soon. But right now, there's been lots of think pieces, hot takes, stuff coming out about the Pope, as you can guess. And we thought maybe one thing that we could do in order to do a big Pope News episode is talk through actually some of the things that Pope Francis had said and did that maybe stuck with us. Talk a little bit too about the reactions to his passing, and then maybe toward the end we'll come around to talking a little bit about the conclave and the process and what it does or what's goofy about it, interesting about it, all that kind of stuff. Lots to say, but I think it'll just be good to have a bit of an unstructured conversation, Matt, about Pope Francis. I'm curious to figure out what we really think. I've been, I think, holding a lot of feelings about the Pope being gone, but actually not a lot of spaces to talk it through. So I guess you're going to become the psychoanalytic screen for all of my papal hangups and papal appreciations.
You can't see it, but I'm smoking a little pipe. I'm sitting down with my big suit jacket on. I've got a piece of paper to write down all of your great insights in, and I'm going to tell you that really at the end of the day, this is all about your parents. So yeah. I'm ready to receive all of this from you.
I mean, he is the ultimate holy dad, the dad among all dads, the big daddy himself. So it is definitely, there's got to be some kind of weird Freudian thing. Actually, all right, we're already spinning this into a Magnificast thing. I wasn't sure whether or not we could really get this content going, but here we are. The Pope himself, I'm sure, is giving me this inspiration. Jacques Lacan, famous weirdo and creep Jacques Lacan, he has this, there's this book that collects a couple of speeches he gave about Catholicism to Catholics. And in one of them, he has this bit about how Catholics are unanalyzable. You just like can't do psychoanalysis on them. They're too weird. And I think that is extremely funny. So here we are. It's because we have just the biggest dad of them all. I think that's why. Also, Jacques Lacan, his brother, famously a Benedictine priest and monk. What a weird guy.
Oh, is that right? Interesting. Wasn't Lacan was kind of Catholic too, though, wasn't he?
He was kind of Catholic. He was French. So
okay. Well, enough said. That's right. A big loss, hard to kind of get our minds around. Man, I want to hear more about what you have to say, Dean, because you're a person who I think thinks about the Pope in a, way, a different way than I do. You've done your homework on the whole topic, and I'm so excited to hear about it. But I want to tell you really quickly that I'm a part of I don't know, some kind of weird sort of like Christian leftist Facebook group, and the Pope's death has caused a schism within the group, which I think is awful.
Whoa.
I know, yeah, big time. When Pope Francis died, everyone was like flocking to sort of like make the most sentimental post about the Pope post, if you will. And anyways, that was going strong for a little bit, and then somebody posted a meme with like a really sort of like gross cartoon of Pope Francis. Not gross, sort of like there's nothing lewd about it. It's just like they made him look really yucky, you know. And then they're like, "This guy is awful for all these reasons," and I mean, you know, the reasons aren't baseless, but it was made in the spirit of divisiveness, and also made in the spirit of just being sort of a crank online, and an inability to read the room, and people didn't like that, and it caused some people to leave the group and some people to stay in the group. Incredible.
That's great. Well, I mean, I think that is one thing to parse out now that Pope Francis is gone, and maybe that's a way to start talking about him. I mean, he was a reformer. He chose the name of Francis after Francis of Assisi, another reformer. And one thing that I think does parallel the two of them is Francis of Assisi also had these kind of visions for reforming the church and taking it in a more kind of simplified direction. And he, you know, at his best, had a lot of good ideas and things about how to do that. But at the end of the day, he also had to institutionalize that passion and that vision in ways that he himself was very frustrated by. And his own order split a bunch of times in a bunch of different directions. And I think that Pope Francis kind of repeats that in a lot of ways. He, you know, the role of being a pope, it is in part being kind of a spokesperson for the Catholic Church, being a teacher for Catholics, being the world's pastor or whatever. But it is also being a diplomat, kind of mediating and managing the many factions within the Catholic Church. And I think Pope Francis was a master diplomat. And in some cases, he advanced a kind of progressive agenda. And in other cases, he made it very clear that he would not advance a progressive agenda and would even block attempts to advance it. So I think it's natural to see, as he's trying to like institutionalize that reformational or kind of reforming zeal. But as a pope, he ran into a lot of limits and ceilings, some of which are self-imposed. Like, I think sometimes we tell a story of Pope Francis that he is like the woke pope, the progressive pope, the guy who really, really wanted to make change and didn't. And I think that's not quite right. He was a conservative in many respects, but I think he also did try to advance a lot of things that sometimes didn't go as far as he would have liked, because the Catholic Church is complicated, and, you know, it's not actually a situation where whatever the Pope says is what happens. There's lots of other stuff that goes on in between. So it makes sense to me that he would be a divisive character in death, just as he was in life, I guess.
Yeah. Yep. That makes sense. Okay. So that's interesting. Definitely a figure that will probably continue to cause like strife and people kind of some people liking him, some people not liking him, you know, willing to overlook different bits of his life. That's just kind of comes with any person when they die. Here's something I hate about the whole thing, though, and I'm sure you can say more about this, Dean, is that all of these presidents and like world leaders are out here talking about how cool he is. I think that sucks because they're lying, because they don't really think that. Like, Donald Trump flew flags at half mast for Pope Francis when he died, because he served the country so thoroughly, you know. He was
a valiant veteran.
Yeah, exactly. Or like even somebody like Joe Biden, you know, he went to the funeral and like has said kind things about the Pope, but just like I hate it so much because they didn't listen to him like at all. Like, he was alive and he like they met with him and he, you know, whatever, gave them his wisdom, but like they didn't listen. They didn't do anything that the Pope wanted them to do. And I think that's so annoying. I think it's so annoying when somebody dies and then everyone mourns them, even though like you had ample opportunity to like listen to this person or like work with this person, and you didn't. But now you're doing it because of just sort of like optics, because you're the presidents.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree, and I ended up. So I've written two pieces since the Pope died. One for the Nation that is kind of boring, I'll admit. But the assignment was to try to explain what's going on with the Pope and the conclave to people who are not Catholic. And guess what? The details are not always exciting, but more information heavy. The more fun piece to write was for Sojourners, and the headline that I didn't choose, but I think is appropriate, was "Mourning a Pope We Often Ignored." And the angle, everybody's talking about Pope Francis, and when you're writing as a journalist, you really got to find an angle, like what's your kind of spin or take. And the one I chose to kind of take is that all these folks are praising Pope Francis, but they refused to hear what he had to say while he was alive, and I think that actually sucks. And I think we shouldn't let them get away with it. I think that's the hot take. So, for example, like Joe Biden, he made a comment, and he's a Catholic, one of our only Catholic presidents. And in the statement, he said that Pope Francis commanded us to fight for peace and protect our planet from a climate crisis. He advocated for the voiceless and powerless. And it's like, yeah, who did he advocate to, though? Joe Biden, the president of the richest, most powerful, violent country on the planet that is responsible for the most emissions per capita by far compared to any country in the world. He literally commanded you to do that, and you didn't do that. And I think that it's really important that, like, we don't allow the kind of diplomacy of all that stuff to cover over the fact that when Pope Francis had a prophetic word, it was directed to the people who are, sitting in the front row at his funeral, like Donald Trump, or I don't know, making statements on the internet like Joe Biden. And now that Pope Francis can't speak for himself, I think we have to like find a way to carry that torch.
Yeah, I think that's great. It's so frustrating. If only somebody could have done something, if only they could have listened. That's a good point. So you said that wouldn't it be great if we didn't let them forget it? We didn't let them get away with it. What does that mean for you in this article that you wrote?
Yeah, well, I pulled out a few places where I thought Pope Francis had kind of maybe a radical take that got covered over while he was alive. And when I was looking through things to find and highlight to kind of make that point, I was rereading a speech that I often reread, which is the fourth speech he gave to the World Meeting of Popular Movements, which is a kind of like, we'll talk more about it later maybe. It's a Vatican initiative to bring social movements together, which is actually very cool. And we might even have done an episode on this speech when it came out. I can't remember.
I think that
but
we did,
in
yeah.
it, yeah, I think so too. In it, he has this really great line where he's talking about structures of sin, and he says, "Thinking about these situations, I make a pest of myself with my questions, and I go on asking, and I ask everyone in the name of God." And I really like that idea of making a pest of yourself. And so I tried to find a few places where he was, pestering people in power. And maybe we can just go through them, I guess. So I was talking about his voice on the environment, on economics, and on peace. So maybe we'll start with the environment side. So people know he published Laudato Si about 10 years ago, a papal encyclical talking about climate change. Laudato Si had a lot of really radical things in it, and it has gone on to inspire a lot of radical activity as well. There have been dioceses who've divested from fossil fuels because of it, which is pretty cool. It's inspired climate activists and so on. And I think most people remember that he has these kind of great one-liners, like hearing the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. But people fail to pay close attention to what it actually means for Pope Francis to respond to that cry. So in the encyclical, which is quite long, he talks about, for example, being vigilant about market-led solutions to climate change. He talks about even being wary of like green rhetoric around climate change, which can sacrifice the poor, as we've talked about on the show in the past. He has a lot of interesting things to say, even about growth and how economic growth shouldn't be a kind of priority for us. And on other places outside of Laudato Si, he's also had a strong voice on the environment. He said that ecocide should be a legitimate crime, considered a crime committed by corporations, which I think is awesome, very cool. That I agree 100%. He engaged the COP process at the UN a lot, very critically, like he had some pretty ambitious and bold things to say. We talked about Laudate Deum, the apostolic exhortation he made ahead of the last COP in the fall, where he was really impatient and crabby with global leaders. And I think that's the thing that people often forget about Pope Francis. You know, he's a very quotable pope, he's a tweetable pope, but he was really calling for some specific kinds of action. And that's the part that world leaders, you know, it's like really easy to let all that stuff go or be like, that's just what the Pope says. But, you know, Pope Francis, he was naive in some ways, but not always. And definitely when it comes to climate change, I think he had some pretty specific, he had a specific agenda that's, you know, it was ignored when he was alive. I can't imagine people like Joe Biden recovering it now that he's passed.
Yeah, big time. There's something that you say later on in this article that I thought was really cool too, that, you know, like whatever, all these presidents, Obama, Biden, Trump, all three of those people, I think, had some overlap with Francis. Is that right? Am I right in thinking that? Now that I'm saying it out loud, I'm worried.
Yeah, that's right. He overlapped all three of those presidents. A wild trajectory.
Yeah, big time. Man, that's crazy to think about. Time happens so much. Anyways, you know, all these three powerful guys, they all had chances to meet with him and talk with him, probably on more than one occasion. Some of these guys, I don't know. I don't really know. I know that he met with all of them though. But like all that say, like they didn't listen, but also Pope Francis is also like not talking to them all the time either. I mean, it'd be great if they listened, I guess. And like just, you know, we're also suspicious of growth and neoliberalism and war, but whatever. But you know, like in Laudate Deum, there's a sense that the demand for these things are not, it's not a top down demand, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It's like sort of a social movement vibe. There's a sense in which the demand is coming from the bottom, and that's where Pope Francis is, I guess, talking to, not necessarily the guys on top. So maybe an interesting piece of the puzzle as well.
Yeah, I think so. I think that if you thought, for example, that the Pope could move the needle with world leaders, you would be severely disappointed and very cynical and
Yeah.
not very excited. And you know, whatever, like the Pope meets with him, but I think the Pope, well, Pope Francis at least, also really understood that that's not even really where the source of power lies. And I think there's probably more to be said about that. Like Pope Francis had a politics, like a more definitive vision, I think, of politics than even some of his predecessors. And that politics was based on what he called it popular politics. So not only solidarity and things like that, but really investing in what's going on among the people themselves and how do you kind of empower people, empower citizens in particular, to take charge of their own political structures and destinies, including with things like climate change. And I think that's really the piece that people forget with Pope Francis is that there's lots of photos, he's making all these apostolic trips, he's talking to people, but whenever he talks to world leaders too, he's always kind of trying to get them to turn their attention to average people as well, not as like a condescension to them or like a, I don't know, you should like pat them on the head or kind of hear what they have to say, but rather to be like, you're accountable to the people. And on the other side, to tell people that like leaders should be kind of accountable to you, and you kind of have to like bend their ear, you know, like they're not just going to listen to you if you don't raise a stink about it. And I think that's an underrated piece of Pope Francis's papacy, that he was a people's pope for sure.
Yeah, you know, I've seen people say that in the last few days. The people's pope. Love it. It's great. It's a good title for him. To me, that sounds like a pretty radical idea, and it seems like in line with who Pope Francis was and all this kind of stuff. Do you think that there's a way that like that title or that way of remembering Pope Francis will like paper over some of like the tough things that he said, or do you think that being remembered solely as the people's pope is like a good move?
No, I think that's always a good question to ask, and it's kind of like which people, right? And
Yeah.
which people are not invited into that. And I think, I mean, that's absolutely true. Like he didn't. I think he did try to create more space for gay people in the church, for sure, for trans people in the church, for sure. And at the same time, he did not have a kind of clear agenda of inclusion or affirmation with either of those two groups, in particular LGBTQ people more broadly. And you can say the same for women. Like, I think he was trying to increase space for women, for sure, to participate in the church, but not trying to imagine a church where women and men are totally equal in office and function and opportunity, etc. And I think that is something you can lose with the kind of like people's pope energy, and it's something that was often brought up in his own life that he's really radical on climate or the economy or whatever, but he can't find a radical voice on gender or, whatever, that kind of stuff. And I think that is important. It's important to bring that up. At the same time, it is always complex. Like, even at his funeral, there was a kind of group of trans people and also a group of poor folks and just kind of other, like, typically maybe underrepresented or explicitly marginalized groups within the church who attended his funeral. And I do think that there was kind of like an attempt by Pope Francis to, like, expand that space. But expanding space is not the same thing as, liberating or welcoming people in an authentic way. And
Right.
yeah, I don't think we lose anything really by being like, he should have done differently. He should have done better on those kinds of things for sure.
Cool. Well, I'm glad that you said it. That's a great way to put it. I don't know. It's worth recognizing that there are, like, tensions. And at the end of the day, Pope Francis, he's, a cool guy that has some great things to say about the climate and about economics and stuff. But at the end of the day, he is, like, the Pope, like, of the Catholic Church. So it feels like there's limitations. There are blockages that I think are, it would take a lot to get over them. Not like not to, like, ignore the issue altogether, but just to recognize the limitations, I guess, in the in the conversation.
Yeah, and I think those are also limitations where, like, I made a distinction earlier where there are kind of self-imposed ceilings and then there are also these, like, external ceilings. And I think on sex and gender in particular, it's kind of a bit of both. Like, Pope Francis, I think he used confusing language around trans people especially, but also around the term gender ideology, for example. Like, he would say things like gender ideology, whatever, it's like a scourge, a sin, it's got to be resisted. And then people would be like, you're saying trans people are not welcome in the church. And he'd be like, when I say gender ideology, I don't mean trans people. And it's like, well, what do you mean though? Like, he never takes the time to explain what it is that he is upset about, and he kind of intentionally, I think, leaves a lot of space for people to fill it in. And I think that, for example, like, he's trying to sort of balance the fact that, like, you have, the bishops in Germany, for example, trying to create a sort of space for gay marriage within the church, like at least same-sex unions and blessing of those unions and so on. And then in Africa, you have the Bishops' Conference saying there will be no blessing of same-sex unions in any church in all of Africa, which is also a defiance of the Vatican in a certain respect. And, I think Pope Francis is kind of, like, juggling those political differences within the church, which is too bad because there are human beings. It's a difference over whether or not people are allowed to love each other in the church, which is absurd. But I think he's also, like, himself not prepared to fully step through that door either, so he can't really, like, force the conversation in a good direction. So yeah, a complicated reformer, to say the least.
Yeah, interesting. All right, well, do you have any last words on Pope Francis? He's gone on to the big bone church in the sky. Any final concluding thoughts? I mean, not forever, just for, like, right now. We could talk about him again later if you want to.
Yeah, maybe a few things. So I mentioned climate. He was really strong on economics and peace as well. You can read the Sojourner's piece for a couple more items there. Maybe one thing that's worth mentioning is when it comes to all these world leaders pouring out praise for him, I do think that the fact that the Pope was willing to call out neoliberalism by name and explain what that was and try to, say that we shouldn't do that is, again, an overlooked piece of his papacy. And not only was Pope Francis being like, the church just has a different economic way of thinking, the way that some theologians kind of wiggle out of economic problems. He also worked with economists, pointed toward them, including progressive ones, in particular Mariana Mazzucato and Kate Raworth, who are two kind of neo-Keynesian economists. He points toward them explicitly in a book called Let Us Dream. And I think those are interesting too. I mean, he's not pointing to, like, radical Marxist for sure, but he is pointing to really progressive economists who are heterodox and not in the mainstream, those kinds of things. So I think maybe the key takeaway for me is Pope Francis, he's trying to make a pest of himself while he's alive, right? He's like pestering these politicians. He's also bringing together these social movements through the Vatican in these different ways. And I think the challenge, kind of as we bury Pope Francis, is to be like, how do we become pests to the powerful as well? And we're not the Pope, but we can, double down on that kind of popular politics model of saying what we really need are those social movements. And maybe that's the legacy that I wish we could kind of take from Pope Francis. I suspect most people probably won't, but that's what I'm going to take from him anyway. He was a people's movement kind of Pope, and we need to build those movements in light of all that. All
right. A good word. That all makes sense. I like it. I like being a pest to the powerful. That's a great bumper sticker. Put it on a t-shirt. All good. All right. So what comes next? So there's a conclave. I've seen the movie, so I know basically everything there is to know about it. That's coming later this month. What is gonna go on during this conclave? What's the situation there?
Yeah, Conclave, the movie, it's about to become real life. Would you believe that? You liked the movie, now see how it really works out in reality. The stuff around the Conclave is always really interesting. I think it's like, it's exciting. It's a time of like pageantry in the church. There's lots of intrigue, lots of drama, lots happening, lots of interests that are represented, and we're just starting to see some of that come out now. There are lists of papabile candidates that, I don't know, journalists think are going to be the Pope, or one thing I really like to do is look at the betting pools on who do gamblers think is going to be the next Pope. So far, I think they're wrong, but that's very funny to look at.
Wait, no, who's in the lead? I gotta know.
Okay, let me look it up right now. I'm going to look at the current rankings. Let's see.
Yeah, I gotta know the gambler take on this one.
You gotta get the gambler take. Betting frenzy. Okay, this is from 3 days ago in The Guardian. So just a few quick quotes. Polymarket, a fast-growing cryptocurrency betting platform that operates similar to a stock exchange, claimed to be hosting peer-to-peer bets worth more than $6 million as of Friday morning. This is on who's going to be the next Pope.
Oh my God.
Top 5 backers of the current favorite, which is Italian Pietro Parolin. He's the Secretary of State in the Vatican. We can talk more about him if you want it in a minute or not. Top 5 backers of that favorite, including one calling himself Holy Moses 7, held positions worth more than $25,000. So a lot of money riding on this particular guy, Parolin. So he's in the lead, it looks like. Who else is going on here? Okay, 2-1 odds are for Luis Tagle, who is from the Philippines. He is kind of a Pope Francis style guy. Some people kind of strangely have called him the Asian Pope Francis, which may or may not be the best way to refer to him, but that is what they say. And then I'll just pull a few others out of here. Some people are putting bets on Timothy Radcliffe. He's a Dominican priest who has been a big piece of the synod, a progressive guy. His odds are 33-1. So those are your tops for now. Parolin, Tagle, Radcliffe is the dark horse, I guess. There you go. We'll have to keep track as we go.
That seems bad that people are betting on that. I don't think that's great. I don't like that. I'm deciding right now. I started following this guy on TikTok who was starting a fantasy Pope league, which I think is a little bit more fun, sort of like a fantasy conclave, where you get, sort of like a draft of cardinals. That seems okay because I don't think there's any money involved, but I don't like the idea of betting on Pope.
It used to be an excommunicatable offense to bet on the Pope, but in the early 20th century, for a lot of reasons, a bunch of canonical laws were abrogated or just like erased essentially, and that was one of them. So the church has never said it's fine to bet on the Pope, but they never recreated the law. So I guess it's fine. That's the moral of the story. It's fine by omission.
Oh no! What a very funny sin of omission. Great. Do you have a particular front runner in your mind in your fantasy conclave?
Honestly, I have no idea. I think here's why it's hard to pick. There's a lot of people reporting on the Cardinals and the conclave and everything else, and it's all interesting. But here's my take as a person who used to write more regularly in Catholic media. So I guess it's just like a crappy, like, annoying insider complaint. But everybody's kind of reporting on the papal candidates as though it's like resume building. So they'll be like Parolin, the Secretary of State. He was close to Pope Francis. He knows how to do diplomacy. He's not really progressive. He's not really conservative. He's just a guy that people like. Then they'll go to Tagle. He's the Asian Pope Francis. He's the continuity candidate, etc. So they'll give you these like profiles, like they'll give you basically like cardinal baseball cards, and then you can figure out which one you think is going to be the Pope. I think that is like exactly the wrong kind of information if you really wanted to make a judgment. Pope Francis, he named 80% of the papal electors, which is something we've talked about on Pope News a long time ago in the past. A few times there have been other cardinals elevated. And there hasn't really been enough reporting on like what do those people think. Like, a lot of cardinals haven't even had a chance to get to know each other or really discuss amongst each other. And it would be helpful to know, like, what have been the opportunities for those cardinals to meet and kind of share their opinion and form some cliques or networks, and who seems to be influential, for example, among like the new crops of bishops coming from the global south. And that reporting is just like not really done. So all that to say, I'm too scared to place a bet. I can't go to my great cryptocurrency betting website and make a confident bet. I'm just in a kind of wait and see moment myself.
All right, that's fair enough. Man, well, I hope there's a good one. I hope we get another good one in there. I hope they pick a really cool name. Yeah, I don't know. I think that if we could keep the ball rolling, it'd be great. The continuity, Pope Francis would be great. Pope Francis too. Would that be fantastic?
Okay, if you became the Pope, what would be your papal name?
Oh no. Pope Larry Boy. Is that can I do that one? Is there any law against that one? Is there any?
There should be if there's not. I'm gonna, whenever we get a new pope, I am gonna send them that suggestion as a kind of first act.
Are there any Vatican laws that say a dog can't play basketball? I don't know. Yeah, what would yours be?
It's a great question. When you pick a pope name, you're kind of signaling like the flavor of your papacy. Like Benedict, he decided to be Benedict the 16th. That means there's a lot of Benedicts before him. It's a kind of traditional name. When John Paul II, he picked one to kind of affirm that he was going to carry out the legacies of Pope John and Pope Paul, the Vatican II popes, and the pope who died just before him. And then, of course, Pope Francis picked Francis to signal that he was a reformer and also interested in ecology. All very interesting. Man, I don't know what kind of pope I'd like to be, but I will say I was reading about this guy named Simeon the Holy Fool not too long ago.
Oh, yeah.
An incredibly weird guy who he walked into town with just carrying a dead dog that he met at a dump, or that he found on a dump. He didn't meet it. He found it. He found it and dragged it into the city. And he would throw nuts at people. And there's one story where he was supposed to heal this blind person, and he put mustard in their eyes, and it made it even worse. And then he said a prayer, and this person was miraculously cured. I think I'd be Pope Simeon the Fool, just like a weird guy doing some wild tricks at the Vatican.
We've had the woke pope, and now we're gonna do the weird pope. Just a weird guy.
That's right. A pope who could really like make JD Vance uncomfortable. That's what I want.
Yeah, that makes sense. I don't know what the flavor of Pope Larry Boy would be. Just the pope who can't find his hairbrush. The pope, I don't know, who's a cucumber.
That's going to be your assignment before the next episode. I think you got to look through the cast of saints and pick a really sort of Bernico style pope.
Yeah. Okay. I can. I've written it down in my homework jotter, and I'm gonna schedule some time to do that for myself. A real answer. Who could say? Who can say what I'll come up with? There's so many good saints out there. Cool. So when it comes to conclave, it is just like the movie though, right? Like they all meet, they have to have sort of like a 2/3 majority, and then they vote. That's the way it works? It can't just be like the movie. It feels like it should be more complicated than that.
Well, the movie is pretty accurate. There's a lot of accuracies, although it leaves out a few things too. There are like dozens of great explainers out there, kind of like what it does and doesn't do well. It is true that they need a 2/3. Well, they used to need a 2/3 majority like forever, but after 1996, Pope John Paul II, he changed the rules so that after 33 votes, the 2/3 majority could be suspended, and then you would just need a simple majority, so over 50%, which I guess in theory is supposed to like avoid having, I don't know, cardinals locked in a room for like months and months and months at a time.
Right.
But there have been criticisms of that because it can also create a polarizing process where like you just sort of wait it out and then you can get the majority instead of 2/3. So I don't know, lots to say about that process, but the movie is pretty accurate in that respect. The one thing that they don't include in the movie is, so there's 252 cardinals, I think it is officially, and about 132 or 35 of them, I forget now, are actually under 80, meaning that they can vote. And the older cardinals who can't vote can still participate in the deliberations around who should be the next pope. And I think that's actually really important and interesting because a lot of people that Pope Francis made pope or made cardinal are pretty radical and maybe more radical than some of the electors. Not all of them will be in Rome, but that's one thing you don't see in the movie and I think is actually very interesting.
Oh, that's interesting. So I don't think I knew that. So if you are under 80, you can vote, and if you're not, you can't.
Exactly.
Why is it that you can't do that? Is it just this is just some Catholic ageism, or is there another thing going on there?
I don't know like what the official reason on the books is, but I do think that it's an attempt to prevent the gerontocracy within the Catholic Church. The Church is more modern than the Supreme Court of the U.S., I guess, in that respect.
Yeah, I was gonna say Joe Biden couldn't vote if you were a cardinal. Great.
Exactly. Yeah, but neither could Donald Trump, I guess. So.
Oh man, good. I wouldn't want either of them to. I think that they shouldn't get to. That's cool.
Or I guess almost. I guess Trump is 78, so maybe he could vote for now, but you never know. Maybe it could be like a short papacy and he couldn't vote in the next one.
Yeah, well, just squeaking in there under the radar. That's interesting. I've been like, again, I don't know. Conclave seems sort of like a weird magical thing, and maybe that's just because I'm a Protestant. And there's sort of like the mystery and majesty of the big Catholic Church surrounding it. But I am kind of interested in it, and I've been reading a few things about Conclave, and something that I found that was, I don't know, bizarre, a bit of interesting Conclave trivia, is that once they go in, they can't talk to anybody on the outside, which,
right.
In the olden days, the good ones, that's probably easy. You're in a building with other people and you can't leave, and no big deal. But however, with the ascension of awful technologies like cell phones and all types of mobile computing, that seems actually like a pretty tall order to be cut off from the world. But I've learned that in 2005, cell phones were banned for the first time during Conclave, which is interesting. So you can't bring a cell phone into Conclave. You can't post. You have to be kind of cut off from the world, which is interesting. I think that is a cool thing, but it gets even more intense than that. Not only can you not bring in a cell phone, the Vatican authorities, as they were, have taken all kinds of really interesting steps to keep the conclave under like a shroud of secrecy and a shroud of isolation. And what's very funny about that is that they've used like some increasingly technological means to do so. So, for example, in an article from Wired, the article is called "The Tech That Safeguards the Conclave Secrecy." They write this: the Vatican has internet access, but within the areas where cardinals will reside and vote for the new pope, there will be signal jammers. The technology prevents two devices from communicating with each other through radio frequency interference. The headquarters become an electronic bunker. Thus, if someone were to manage to introduce a microphone, telephone, or computer, they would be unable to transmit information. This is so wild. I mean, a jammer like that, I guess, is probably not the most, like, it's technology for sure, and it's not the kind that you'd expect the Vatican to employ to sort of keep the whole thing secret, but I guess not exactly like new technology. Something else that I thought was quite interesting, though, is that the article from Wired mentions that like the they have to put all these like sort of signal jammer technologies and other sort of technologies into place so that not only is it to prohibit the cardinals on the inside from kind of reaching the outside or vice versa or whatever, but they also mentioned that like they have to sort of protect the physical conclave space from like drones or like other weird like types of security breaches. And it is such a funny idea to think about that. It just reminds me um listeners of the show will know that Dean and I are both pretty Big Brother fans, and a an enduring tactic on Big Brother is for fans of the show to try to intervene in the show itself by like throwing messages over the wall of the Big Brother house, or like I don't know, any all kinds of things like that, or shouting hints to the game from outside. And it is that vibe for sure. Like these Cardinals are locked inside the Big Brother house and they cannot get to the outside, no matter how much these fans are like shouting. They're throwing messages over the wall. Please elect Pizza Balla or whatever. Just some great stuff going on in the Vatican. A really secure fortress. An anti-posting barrier has been erected around it, and I love to see it. It's great.
It is great. That is one thing I love about the conclave. It is so secret in a really big way. And something that is cool about it is, I think especially, I mean, this is real like Virilio kind of talk, right? Like we live in an age where everything is surveilled at all times, or at least in theory could be at all times. There's kind of like nothing that is unavailable to the eye or ear of some kind of device if you just like did it right. And I like the idea that the conclave is this sort of like incredibly secret retreating space, and still nevertheless like things will inevitably leak out of it. I guarantee it. And it's going to be really interesting too to see how that goes. Like, all through history there have been lots of intrigue around how information gets out of the conclave and gets into it. And I don't know, looking forward to finding out the big secrets anyway, while we don't have our 24-hour live feeds into the papal conclave like in Big Brother.
It makes it even more exciting to not have the 24-hour live feeds. I don't want to know what's happening in there. I just want to I want to get the juicy gossip. That's great.
It is great.
What has anything particularly scandalous like leaked out in the past, or just regular rumors?
There have been, I would say, things that aren't super salacious but are somewhat scandalous. So, for example, there's a cardinal whose name is escaping me right now, but I will think about it and see if it comes to me. He was involved in a banking corruption trial, basically. Cardinal Becciu, that's his name. Becciu. Becciu, didn't know that. That's how I'll remember it for next time. He was convicted in an embezzlement and fraud charge, along with a bunch of other church people, and he was sentenced even to jail time. But he maintains that he is innocent, and so he's like, I should be able to participate because I'm going to appeal this ruling. And apparently, they say there are 2 documents signed by Pope Francis saying that he is not allowed to participate.
Whoa.
And so that's a big scandal, I guess. Interesting, and not unlike the movie Conclave. So that's one piece. There's also a bishop or a cardinal, I believe, from Peru, who is accused of sexual abuse, and that was a bit recent. And he's in Rome and will likely participate in the conclave unless the other cardinals decide that he can't. And because there's no pope, that's all very complex. So that's pretty interesting. There was also some news. This is not scandalous, I guess, but just kind of like an interesting thing. Because there's no pope, because dad's not around, everybody else has to figure out what to do and kind of how to run it and so on. And 3 cardinals in particular, Cardinal Marx, which is an extremely funny name for a guy in Germany. He is also a left-wing guy, Cardinal Marx. And then also Cardinal Tagle, who we mentioned earlier, and Cardinal Mamberti have all been selected to assist in organizing the conclave. And that's really interesting because they're all progressives of one kind, not all in the same way, but they're all progressive. So they'll be the ones to kind of make some of these decisions and do some of the organizing around it. So exactly what that means and kind of who gets to participate and who doesn't is unclear, but interesting to see kind of like who's starting to emerge as like the folks who are going to be really putting all that stuff together.
Right. Yeah, interesting.
I think, one other thing that will be interesting to watch is how the media starts to coalesce around the conclave. So, for example, there have been some efforts to report a little bit on like how cardinals are feeling and whether or not there are really factions emerging. And so far, all the cardinals I've seen interviewed, at least in English media, are going out of their way to say it's not going to be a factional election, that they all want to stress that they need a kind of candidate of unity and all that kind of stuff. That's all pretty like boilerplate. So you don't have anybody running in there saying, we're going to form a cabal and elect our guy. But the funny thing about that is after Pope Francis was elected, it was revealed that a couple of conclaves ago, so during the Benedict conclave, there was a kind of center-left group of European cardinals who formed, and they had identified Bergoglio, the future Pope Francis, as their guy that they wanted to get elected. And even though he wasn't elected during the Benedict conclave, he was elected next time. And, the media up until the conclave likely, maybe they'll get like a cool scoop here or there or something. But my guess is most cardinals will play their cards pretty close to their chest in public. But I'm always curious to hear what happens after. Like, what are the kind of power blocks or whatever. So maybe that's like the fun scavenger hunt you can do when reading conclave reporting. Like, see if you can find the secret tells that, I don't know, certain cardinals are gunning for a particular person or forming a faction or whatever. Because obviously those things exist. Factions exist in the church, even if people don't want to admit it.
Yeah, it's such an interesting thing. People seem, I don't know. There's a general consensus, at least in things I've read and things that I've observed people saying, that, because Pope Francis is sort of like stacked the deck, that there will be another sort of progressive pope or something. And I don't know. I hope that's true. But it is interesting to think about how, with Pope Benedict, you get somebody who is progressive, and the deck was not stacked in his favor. But there's like sort of a block of power. So who knows, I guess, what will happen this time around. It just sort of depends on how some of those politics play out, I guess. Yeah. But we can't really know until after the fact, right? There's like, there won't be reporting on that until after it's all said and done.
Yeah, I mean, unless somebody really spills the beans, but my guess is that they won't. And I think too, that's a good open question. Like so Pope Francis, he has appointed the majority of cardinal electors under 80, but he hasn't really. It's not like every cardinal that he elevated shares his vision of the church or is a progressive or whatever we might think is progressive in the Catholic Church. His big thing is that he has promoted cardinals who would be often from like untraditional places. Like there are some dioceses in the world where it's like this diocese just always has a cardinal. And whoever becomes a bishop there, you can just sort of expect or take for granted that they become cardinals. And over the course of his papacy, Pope Francis did overlook some of those dioceses. They're not top of mind for me, but they were big stories when they happened. Like a bishop kind of like still waiting around for the red hat that they didn't get, which is kind of a, subtle political snub. And on the other hand, he has elevated cardinals from lots of places that didn't traditionally have a cardinal, and also from communities like Wilton Gregory, who was the Archbishop in Washington, D.C. He was the first ever African-American cardinal. Not the first black cardinal, obviously, but the first one from African-American descent. The first Dalit cardinal is in the mix now. Like lots of different kind of cardinals who come from, I guess, just like communities that have been marginalized or geographical peripheries. So what you could say is, Europe is still the center of gravity in the conclave. Like if you were to like divide up all the regions, Europe ultimately has less cardinals compared to the rest of the world, but they have the greatest concentration of cardinals. Kind of like I don't know, maybe this is a weird analogy, but like the state of Hawaii. Like white people are the most like they're the highest percentage of like a single ethnic group, but they're a minority compared to everybody else in Hawaii. It's the same in the papal conclave. So all that to say, the electors are appointed by Francis, but they won't necessarily share his ideas. They'll just kind of, I guess they benefit from his idea that the church ought to reflect kind of the peripheral nature of it more and more. Wow, so anything can happen. That's what it comes down to, I think.
Wow. It's anybody's game. Who knows what will really happen in a few days. It starts on the 7th, is that right? Of May?
It starts on the 7th, yeah.
Wow.
And then it can go... I've become such a nerd about conclaves. I don't know. I'm just talking to talk at this point. But it starts on the 7th. It can go for 33 votes, as we said earlier. They can vote, I think it's 2 times a day. So that's the max. But there have been some cardinals who've said they think it's going to be fast. So whether or not they're correct, I guess we'll see. But a couple of cardinals have said like 2 or 3 days. That's what they expect. So we'll find out.
Wow. What a called shot that you think it'll be fast. That's so interesting.
I know.
I mean, for our sakes, for all of us watching on the outside, this great big reality TV show that is Conclave, I hope it is fast. I want to see who the next pope is going to be. I don't know. I guess I'm excited. Just interesting. An interesting thing to happen. Happens so, I don't know, so sparingly. Just always an interesting thing to see unfold.
Yeah, it reminds me, the Archbishop of Canterbury office is still vacant, I guess. So what's the deal with that? Maybe that we have to find that out for the next episode. How do they even do that?
Oh, yeah. England? I'm sure the king just kind of gets somebody, but I'll find the real answer and I'll let you know. I'm so sorry. It's just, it can't be as interesting as this. whatever the answer is, I'm sure it's stupid. Whatever. Who cares? Who cares what's going on over there?
Well, there you have it. The last big Pope news around Pope Francis. You know what? Here's something we never did, and maybe we should do at some point. So Pope Francis, he did not write a lot of encyclicals. He wrote a lot of stuff, but not a lot of encyclicals. He only wrote 4, technically 3, if you don't count the first one, which was basically written by Benedict. And the 4th one was released at the end of last year in October. It's called Dilexit Nos. And it's on it's on the heart of Jesus. It's a more like devotional encyclical, and we never read it on this podcast. But maybe when we're really missing Pope Francis, that'll be the excuse to go back and read the last encyclical we didn't talk about. But I don't know. I miss him. Wish him the best. What a great Pope for a while. Not perfect, but you could have done a lot worse. You can definitely say that about Pope Francis, and I think it'll be a bummer to not have his voice even in the short term here.
You could have done worse. Is such a funny way to round that one out. Yeah, great, man. Well, yeah, sad to see him go. It'll be so interesting to see what the legacy he leaves behind, and it'll be so interesting to see what kind of legacy he leaves behind once there's a bit more like distance and space. But we'll see. We'll see how it all shakes out. It'll be fine, I'm sure.
Yeah, it'll be fine. Thanks for listening to the Magnificast. If you like what you heard, you can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/themagnificast. If you do that, you can get into our Discord. There are people talking about all kinds of stuff in there. It's a great space. There's going to be a lot of Pope watching in there, I'm sure, coming up soon. Getting all our great fantasy Pope draft stuff together. Yeah, you should get in there and talk about the Pope. Our music is by Maria Armstrong. The outro is by The Illogical Spoon, and we'll see you next week.
I don't wanna get up for church in the morning, souls alive. Heaven come to earth and there won't be no church. We'll meet down by the riverside. There we'll swim with all creation. Never get tired, never bored. Don't worry, someday there'll be no dam between us and our Lord. Jackson, keep your hoods up. Keep your hoods up and you stay up late. In Jackson, you keep your hoods up. Well, you keep your hoods up and you stay stay up late. Oh, don't mind a cold night, but we might mind if you leave too soon. So come on now, it's still early. Beside what else are you gonna do? As we kissed in the alley by the Michigan Theater, fall snow was glowing in the lights of the downtown. Saw a spark in your eyes, I just spoke it. Said we're gonna turn this whole place upside down. Then you said, my dear, do you really mean this? I said, I only know what I feel right now. I said, poets lie, sometime come true. Stay away from me, where see what we can do. Poets lie, sometime come true. Stay away from me, where see what we can do in my town. I don't wanna get up for church in the morning, church in the morning, souls alive. Heaven come to earth and there won't be no church. We'll meet down by the riverside. There we'll swim with all creation. Never get tired, never bored. Don't worry, someday there'll be no dam between us and our Lord. In Jackson, you keep your hoods up. Well, you keep your hoods up and you stay up late. Jackson, you keep your hoods up. Well, you keep your hoods up and you stay up late. This the kind of town folks get stuck in. Yeah, people get stuck here, but I chose to stay. If you ever want to know something or know someplace, you just can't know them all. At some point, you must make a choice and choose someplace and make a home.